What do you have to lose from getting a little horny and figuring yourself out? Why would I suffer to fix my suffering? I tell you things that you're not going to be able to unknow. Having the courage to ask for what you want instead of acting out the subconscious, just painful ways that we learn to get it. And most of the things that we do
Mhm.
are rooted in the subconscious quest for pain. And ultimately, like where you're going to go is being able to bring an orgasmic level of approval to these things.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Embody Radio, the premier podcast for high performing humans looking to develop their unique formula to truly embody their happiest, highest, healthiest selves. I am your host, Emily Duncan, and I am so excited to be back for another episode. So excited to just be back on the podcast in general, but very pumped for this specific episode because today we are talking to, hands down, one of the most powerful people I've ever met in my life. Someone that is more on and in purpose than most people I have encountered, and I've encountered a lot of successful people. I'm also lucky enough to call this person one of my very best friends, and it is a repeat guest on the podcast from a little over a year ago. Today, we are talking with none other than Miss Brittany Brantley, aka Lionhive on Instagram, and today, we're getting juicy today. We are getting very juicy today. We're talking all about pain and pleasure, and why the ways that we've gone about trying to heal our pain in the past, aka trying to heal pain with pain, it's actually not a great strategy. But we're also talking about why exactly we do that, why we are so devoted to our pain, why we try to use that as a strategy to heal from our pain, Brittany's journey to using pleasure as the tool to heal pain, and how that has become a massive part of her work, and how she's been able to, I would say, as somebody that's very close to her, quantum leap in this last year, that she's really been embodying this work. She is truly somebody that embodies her work at every stage. We're talking about the ego. We are talking about the subconscious. We are talking about all of the sneaky little ways your subconscious gets its needs met. We are talking about the existential kink principle of having as evidence of wanting. So the things that you think you don't want in your life, but are still showing up time and time and time again, why you actually secretly want those. Ooh, we're talking about a lot today. We are talking about a lot. And this episode, like I said, it's very juicy. But if you are not ready to be a little triggered, and to be a little called out, this might not actually, fuck that. No, this is the episode for you. If you kind of recoil a little bit at the thought of being triggered or called out on your behavior, because if you are listening to this podcast, this is the podcast for high performing humans looking to embody their happiest, highest, healthiest self. And I guarantee you, your happiest, highest, healthiest self is radically accountable to their actions and for their actions, and is radically honest with themselves. And embodying our happiest, highest, healthiest selves, that radical honesty and accountability, what that looks like, it looks like holding up the mirror to yourself when you least want to look, right? So I redact what I was about to say. This is precisely the podcast for you. If you are kind of stuck in some pattern loops and are maybe a little scared of looking in the mirror, it's time. We're looking in the mirror today, and we're giving you a better way and a much more pleasurable, dare I say it, orgasmic way to work through your shit. And I could not be more excited. So one quick housekeeping thing. I goofed a little bit, and I will take some radical accountability of my own here. When I was recording this episode with Brittany, I had my microphone turned backwards, I think. So the audio on my end is not as crisp as you might be hearing it in this intro or as you're used to, but I promise you this episode is still full of amazing, juicy, golden nuggets that you absolutely need to help embody that happiest, highest, healthiest self, that next version of you. So again, I take radical accountability for that. I apologize for the lower quality on my end, but again, I know this episode is for you. If you are listening to this episode, it was meant to find you today. So I'm going to stop talking. We're just going to get into the juice right away. Let's dig in to our podcast with Brittany Brantley.
She's just hanging. Okay, what do we have?
We have It's Not That Deep.
Oh,
It's
isn't that
so
the message?
serious. And King of Cups, like, come up to the surface a little bit. Don't take it so serious.
Hey,
Were we prepared to be serious Sallies? Was
Well,
that what we were prepared to do?
I'm always prepared to be serious, Sally. That's like my default, and that's a problem. That's a problem.
Live a fantasy.
Libra season.
Live a
She's
fantasy.
here.
That's the vibes today.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to include that in the recording. So guys, we're doing a live card pull for everyone. So You are much better at tarot interpretation. So what are we getting from King of Cups reversed energy?
We have some combined energy of it's not that deep. We're in Libra season, so stick to where you have oxygen. Stick and breathe. If you have space to breathe, that's where you need to be. It's not that deep. Okay. Mercury retrograde might be taking things a little seriously. It's okay. Just adopt the little personality you need. Live a fantasy. Adopt the personality you need. Alter ego it if necessary.
Maybe this is the alter ego podcast. I love that. Also, I really did put my denim jacket on. So for everyone listening or watching, Brittany texted me this morning about how it was like nice and cool outside where she is. And so she was like, oh, I can wear a denim jacket. And I was like, I can't outside, but inside.
In my house, I can.
Inside, I can do that. I have that available to me. Oh, man. Oh, man.
I have my beverage. I'm ready.
Beverages are always a must. Always a must. All right. So welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on here again. It was like, because it was retrograde last year when we recorded a podcast. So I love that. That was such a good episode. Like we got into so much. And
we covered a lot of ground. I have re-listened to it like twice and I'm like, I mean, I know we're good, but it was we covered a lot of good ground. I hope everybody got some good intro too.
Oh, I know they did.
And see your beautiful face so much better now.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. So before we dive in, if you guys haven't already listened to the first episode that Brittany was on, I'm going to link it in the show notes. It was truly a magical episode. I mean, like, what do we expect? We dove into all things like the basics of birth charts, what Mercury retrograde really means, which ironic because like I said, we recorded during Mercury retrograde last year and we are at the tail end of Mercury retrograde in Libra and it moved into Virgo yesterday, didn't it?
Sure did.
Which is such a fun flip-flop because we just came out of Virgo season in Libra retrograde and now we are in Libra season in Virgo retrograde, which is a fun time. So
we're recording on a Virgo moon day also. Yep. So we're really riding the vibes. That's a big signature on your chart. It's a big signature on my chart. We are astrologically compatible.
I love that.
Today. I mean, all the days.
I mean, every day, but especially today. And it's a Venus day. So Libra energy is strong. Like, what a time. Podcast day. I love recording podcasts on Fridays. I love doing anything creative on Fridays because I'm like, the energy is just right. Just feels a lot better. So if you guys haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that one, especially if you are somebody that you consider yourself like astrology curious and maybe you know your big three, maybe you don't, maybe you have no idea, maybe you just know your sun sign, maybe you don't know anything, but you're wanting to dive in because Brittany is one of the people, like brief backstory of how Brittany and I became friends. Brittany had followed me and then we just started connecting on astrology stuff. Like I remember you responded to one of my stories one day and I was like, I'm just going to start talking to this person about all of this stuff. And now here we are. And like Brittany is truly brief sappy moment, one of my friends that I am most grateful to have. She's one of those people that I talk to every single day and it's just such a natural exchange and a natural cadence and it's mutual learning about each other and helping each other learn about the other. Like it's such a beautiful expansive friendship, and especially as somebody that's like really entrenched in the fitness world as my job, but that's also very spiritually inclined. I told her this the other day, but I'm so grateful for my friends that are not in the fitness industry at all because you guys bring me so much different perspective. And I would say you are like the queen of bringing me new perspective. And also just the evolution that you've had this last year into what you're doing now. It all makes sense, but it's been so insane to watch in the best possible way. So now that I've given like a brief intro, go ahead and just introduce yourself to people. Let them know kind of what you do, who you are, what you show up in the world to do, how you experience life, all of that.
You know, very casual questions.
As they always are.
Yeah, I am Brittany. I am a paradox coach. That means that I am someone that guides adults through inner child healing. I teach people how to speak the language of the subconscious through the language of the ego, right? We got to have an access point. Um, I love my job. I love what I do. I love working like with my one-on-one clients. My friggin' Paradox Play membership site is my favorite place to be with group coaching. Like that is the freaking vibe, is being able to work with people in a broader sense, like, and I know that you work with like so many people and you're part of so many different like little collectives and things like that. It really is so different to be able to connect to community that's like not in a hive mind sense, despite my name Lion Hive, but not in the hive mind sense, but in the just like it's so relieving to have people who are just committed to the same areas of growth that you are, who show up for the same things. So yeah, I guide people one-to-one in a group setting through the murky mirrors of the subconscious to figure it out, to shift the way you think about your thinking, to expand and understand your patterns a little more deeply so that you can have a little more autonomy over
Beautiful. I love that. And I want to get into like some of the terminology of what all of that means, because I think that's a really great direction for us to take this. But first, I want to just acknowledge one of the things that I think is most pivotal about the way that you frame your work, because I know I've fallen victim to this, you probably have as well, and that's probably kind of where your work was born out of, but especially like the spiritual communities that I see a lot of at present, when we're talking about like doing the work, it's like this big, arduous, carrying the rock up the mountain type journey of like, oh, this is so hard. And like thinking that the harder it is and the more that we cry and suffer and all of that through our work, the more that we earn whatever's on the other side of it. Whereas you have brought such a unique perspective where you're like, what if we make the healing fun?
What if it's actually fun, right? Like we think like we suffered to get the suffering, so we need to suffer to get the fix. And it's like, sure, yeah, like you can do that. You've probably been doing that. And I'd venture to say that you, like me, have probably been doing that for a long time. Strangely enough, it hasn't took yet. I wonder why that might be,
It's almost like
right?
the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and
Yes,
expecting different results. Like,
yes. So I was like, what if I try the opposite? What if I connect to pleasure for growth? For my, like, we have this idea of spirituality and pleasure being like so separate. And I'm like, yeah, I did that for a long time. I grew up in that, and it's not very conducive to a healthy relationship with your whole self. And the question, like, what if it didn't have to be so hard? What if this didn't have to be such a challenge? What if I didn't have to suffer to earn it? Those are questions I return to often, especially when I'm in that muscle memory of suffering, right? Because it is muscle memory. We learn to heal in a specific way, and it's like training a muscle incorrectly. Like you can do squats with poor form all you want, and you're going to get some benefits, and you're also going to get some detriment, right? Like it's not going to be as successful for you, as efficient, as effective. You can adjust though whenever you want. You can adjust whenever you want, put in the work to make that adjustment. So yeah, it's definitely the approach that I take is based in pleasure. Why the hell would I suffer for my suffering? Why would I suffer to fix my suffering? It stopped making sense to me after a certain point. And maybe that was the point we all reached in post 2020 life was like, we just have, this is the theater of the absurd, and we just need to go like full send into absurdity, like griefy absurdity with a little more. You know, when I worked at the therapeutic day school, I worked with a lot of kids with all kinds of social, emotional, behavioral disorders who were very, very aggressive. And one of my favorite coworkers, she was describing like a situation she'd been in with one of our students, and she was like, sometimes you just got to go bigger than they are. If they're getting crazy, sometimes you got to be a little crazier than that. And while I don't necessarily vibe with calling people crazy, the sentiment of like, my trauma is really nuts, so maybe I need to try something that's a little bit crazier than that, rather than just like suffering through it. And pleasure was absolutely the answer, the approach. And it was just like, oh God, I can breathe. Just like I said at the beginning, I can breathe here.
Wow.
I have space to breathe here. So
absolutely. I fucking love it. And one thing before we even get into, because I think a really nice direction to take this today will be introducing people to the concepts that you work with as far as their subconscious, their ego, how these things, the unconscious, how those things show up and play out in their lives. Because I think, awareness is one of the first steps, right? Like people don't even know that this programming is running. They just know what they know. And so bringing some language to that and clarity to that, I think will be really powerful. But the first thing that I want to touch on, and this is something you and I have talked about in our personal conversations, but I notice it on social media every day in conversations with people, face to face on a regular basis. People are very committed to their pain. Why do we think that is?
Oh,
like we want, so like an example before we get,
yeah.
So before we get into that, like an example for you guys listening, you're like, no, I'm not. How devoted are you to being like, well,
Devoted.
My life is so hard because I am this, or I have such and such mental illness, or I function in such and such way, or I'm dealing with such and such thing. And that's not to say that there's things in life that are not challenging, but why are we so committed to returning to that pain point and like letting it take its shoes off and sit on the couch with us? Why are we that way?
My simple and not so simple answer for that is because somewhere in our subconscious, in the self that exists underneath the ego, the ego is our known self, and our subconscious is that it's like the iceberg. It exists underneath the surface. You don't see it, but it is running your life. When you dream, when you're asleep, your subconscious takes over. It's because subconsciously somewhere in you believes that focusing on it is the solution to your problem. We repeat patterns, even patterns that are painful, including connecting to our pain and using it to stop us, because we believe that it is an answer or a solution to the problem we're experiencing. The issue is most of us don't know what problem we're experiencing other than the pain. It's like if you've got like a gaping wound on your arm, you're just like, here it is, here's my pain. And like that's how we tend to operate with like, especially when we start getting into the middle ground between spirituality and psychology, and using the two to kind of like marry to one another and like heal through that. People get so bogged down in the pain, and it's devotion. Mary Oliver says that attention is the beginning of devotion. Well, what are you going to give attention to if not the gaping wound on your arm, right? So you give attention to it, and you give attention to it, and we know where attention goes, energy flows. So you think that I'm rooting around in, if you've got a garden and it's full of weeds, and you're just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like more weeds, let's pull up more weeds, let's pull up more weeds, let's pull up more weeds. But you're the garden, and you're just like making fresh wound over and over again, thinking you're doing the healing work. And I don't think it's anything that anyone does intentionally, but it's often, I think, so too, that the pain didn't get any attention for so long. So that as soon as you get a name for it, you're like, whoa, let's stop right here. Let's take a minute. Let's look around at where we're at. And that is the place that most people stop. Most people stop therapy once they get a name for it, right? Oh, I've solved it. I've figured it out. Done. No, there are things that happen after you figure out like what the issue is. There's a whole like healing protocol. There's a whole like process that you go through in order to address it. But I really think is that we suffered mostly alone for most people. You know, the pain that we experience is psychological. So we stop once our brain has a name to call it. And most of the names that we call it come with solutions that I'm going to quote that solutions. If you're listening, that was air quoted. That don't actually solve anything. It just stops you and represses whatever like you're experiencing. For me, it was anxiety, you know, and I know that you've shared things on your like format or on your platforms about this, but for me, anxiety was like, oh, that's what I'm experiencing. Okay, I've got to figure out how to stop this. And all I'd ever done was try to stop it. But then I got armed with, oh, well, here are some tools to stop it. When what I needed was guidance on how to move through it, right? How to allow it instead of resisting it. Pain's scary. So of course we want to stop. We're designed to stop when there's pain, you know?
Absolutely. All of that, like that's a podcast. We're done. We completed the whole thing. Like, even just that glimmer of awareness of identification is not the last point on the journey. So receiving a diagnosis for like a physical ailment or a mental illness or whatever, that's not where things stop. And I think an initial reaction for a lot of people, and myself included, you know, years back, if I were to hear something like this, I would feel super invalidated, right? Like, oh, you don't understand how hard this is for me, or like this, that, the other. The goal of that statement is not to invalidate you, it's actually to empower you, that you don't have to stop or be stopped at or by this thing. In fact, that could be an initiation point into the life that you would like to live. And so it's the ultimate, yes, it's the ultimate invitation. And so if you're listening to this and your immediate response is to like take offense or to think, you know, oh, they just don't get it, they just don't understand, that's not it at all. It's to provide a different perspective to your pain so that it can actually be integrated into your life. I think that's something else too, that we talk all about killing the ego and, you know, starve the ego, feed the soul, all this stuff. And I'm like, that doesn't work. Your ego is going to be here, integrate it. Like you're going to be sitting with it anyway. It's going to be here. So you might, instead of just trying to like squash it like a bug on the floor, it doesn't work that way. So you learning how to work with it, that is the path. That is the path to wherever it is you're trying to go. So it's not to say, hey, what you're dealing with or, you know, the struggles that you face because of what you're dealing with don't matter. It's just to say there's a different way.
Yeah. The spiritual component of, at least for me, for my like mental health exploration, the spiritual component of it consistently came to my own points of offense. Like I was so offended all the time by like all of the different ways that other people dared go about like their healing processes. And for me, it was because I was like, how dare you liberate yourself when I'm suffering? It made me feel more alone when other people, like, you know, and this is probably a little taboo to say, but like when other people are doing well and you're like, I'm not doing well, I feel lonely because it's not that you want anyone to do poorly. It's just that it's like, now I feel more alone, you know, and pain is lonely. If you have ever experienced chronic pain, it's invisible and it is so lonely. And that's another reason that we like to tend to it, is because it's mine, it's unique, and I'm so alone in it. And when you're alone, it festers, right? And that's all this work is, hey, you've already tried all of that other stuff. Maybe let's try this. Like, what do you have to lose from like
Mhm.
getting into your pleasure? Like, what do you have to lose from getting a little horny and figuring yourself out? I don't think you have much to lose for that. Like,
That's gonna be the show quote. That's it right there. We got the sound bite. She's here.
you might get some healing, and if you don't, you got off a few times. You were willing to be an experimenter in your life. Like, my human design is set up to be the great life experimenter. I'm
Mhm.
willing to try it, right? I when it comes to like trying foods, I'll try anything twice. When it comes to weird sex stuff, I'll try anything twice. Like, if I just gotta know like whether or not I actually like it. So when it came to like my healing stuff, I was like, man, I've tried this same stuff like 60,000 times. Maybe I need to try something else. And that's most of the people that come to me are like, listen, I've I've done all the things. I think I've done all the things. This approach seems a little strange to me. It's a little out of my comfort zone. I think that's the number one thing that people are like, so I want to be open to this. I need some hand holding. Right. And I'm
Mhm.
like, cool, like, let's do it. Let's go as gently as you want into your healing process. Right. Because
Mhm.
most of us try it the hard way for a really long time. Healing on
Mhm.
hard mode is what I like realized I'd been doing. And I was like, what if it didn't have to be a struggle? What if it could be
Mhm.
fun?
Yes, absolutely. I fucking love it. Okay, so diving into a little terminology because again, like these are all terms that especially anybody that is spiritually curious, like maybe following some Instagram pages, seeing some graphics, quotes, whatever, they see these terms and maybe they don't know what they mean. So let's
Mm.
start first with defining the ego. What is that? What does it mean? How does that show up in our everyday lives?
Mm. The ego is who you know yourself to be, the motivations you know yourself to have, the driving force you know to exist, the why you know yourself to have in everything you do. This is what you know about yourself. Your ego is what you know about yourself. So I know myself to be kind. I know myself to be generous. I know myself to be loving. And then
Dun,
you
dun,
get
dun.
into the subconscious, right? So people will often see this as the unconscious. Carl Jung called it the unconscious. You'll see it referred to as the subconscious or the shadow, depending on what spiritual circles you're in. That's the you don't know, right? And it's not because you've never experienced it, right? I know myself to be kind. That's my ego. My subconscious is like, yeah, all those other times I was unkind, we're just gonna file delete those because that's not who I know myself to be, right? So then I get to like
Mhm.
ignore when I'm treating people poorly because that's not who I am, right? Like, that's not who I am. Maybe I'm really stingy with my time, but I think myself to be generous. So I never experience myself in this way. And there are a lot of underlying reasons why our subconscious develops the way that it does. So my background is in child development through birth through death. And the majority of my work, like I said at the beginning, is centered around inner child healing for the adult. Your subconscious, I believe, is molded and shaped and then set onto autopilot through childhood. So the big things that you experience, the small things you experience, the concepts of self that you have, everything you learn about who you're allowed to be and the rules to participate in the family, to participate in whatever your social group is, whatever your community is, your religious groups, society at large, depending on like how you're socialized, especially like if you're as a kid, like if you're raised as like a boy or a girl, the socialization is different. All of those things combine to make both the ego, who you know yourself to be, which is usually who you're allowed to be, and your subconscious, your unconscious, or your shadow, which is who you're not allowed to be. Right. So the biggest, like the easiest example for this is like a kid that is told like they need to grow up. You need to quit acting like a little baby. You need to quit acting like that. And you're like, oh, well, I really want to be taken care of, but mom says I need to stop acting like a baby. So don't tuck me in tonight. And then you're laying in bed, staring at the bottom of the bunk bed or the ceiling, and you're just like, damn, this kind of sucks. I really wanted to be taken care of, right? But you're not allowed to be. You need to grow up. You need to be a big kid. You need to whatever. So you deny that need because you were told that you needed to be something. We trust our parents implicitly, and there are so few parents that intentionally do bad. Like there are so few parents that are intentionally doing things wrong or bad or in a hurtful sense. So it's just the way that we learn to filter the world and how we experience the world. And then, you know, that kid that was staring at the bottom of the bunk bed grows up to be someone that, you know, sabotages their business. So they've got to go, you know, live with a friend. Well, guess what? You're getting that care. Care. And your ego freaking hates it. Who you know you're someone that needs to take care of themselves, remember? Someone that needs to do for themselves, someone that does not need other people to take care of them because you're a big kid, right? So you're sitting on your friend's couch going, damn, I'm a failure. And my process involves you going, I think I'm getting all of that care that I really wanted as a kid. What if this was like incredibly fulfilling? And that's where it gets taboo because you're like, what? Brittany, I'm sleeping on my friend's couch. Like I am living in such a way that is detrimental to my identity of self. And I'm like, yeah, man, it's pretty fucking successful, isn't it? And you're just like, tell me more. How is this successful? And that's where it gets exciting is you start, you know, a book that everybody needs to like pause this and then go purchase and come back is Existential Kink by Dr. Carolyn Elliott. And one of the axioms that she discusses in it is the truth is sensational. And I love that part of my job. It is very fun to be a little sensational when you tell people or ask people. That's the main thing I do is ask people questions. Like, is it possible that this is some kind of massive fulfillment of your deep subconscious desire that you never knew you had? So even telling people they have this desire or asking them if they do, that's often the sensational part. But when you start looking around, you start sensationalizing yourself and going, well, damn, I was getting that care in this way. I was getting that care over here. I was getting that care over here. Like maybe I'm a chronic complainer to other people. Well, I'm getting sympathy, right? You think my boss is crazy too. You think my mom is nuts too. You think, you know, like whatever it might be, like you are now giving me care and I'm getting that. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, man, I really like, I complained a lot today. I really hate that. I wish I wasn't a complainer. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't wish that you weren't a complainer and you don't wish that you weren't on the couch because that's how you're getting your need met. So the ego is the part of you that says, hell no, I don't want to be on that couch. And your subconscious is the part that's going, oh, thank God someone else can take care of me. I'm so tired of taking care of myself. Maybe they'll tuck me in. Do you think they'll tuck me in on their couch? And then I can like really double down on this care that I had been craving since that moment where I was told I wasn't allowed to want the care that I need.
Which isn't that so funny? Because not funny, haha, funny weird. Like we as humans have such an ass backwards but almost foolproof way of getting exactly what it is that we want. But when we don't admit to ourselves or have the capacity to know what needs admitting, like how many people never arrive at the point where they're like, oh yeah, I actually really just wanted to be tucked in, huh? And that's the power of this work, is you're maybe, instead of getting to the place where you've set your whole life on fire and need to go stay with a friend because you don't have like the means to take care of yourself for a period of time, which also, if that's you, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay.
Yes.
Like, shit happens, life happens. But like, what if we could become consciously aware of that subconscious aspect, and then start just asking for the care that we, or the thing that we want and need in our everyday life?
Yes. It takes a lot of courage to begin asking for what you want direct, right? It takes a lot of courage to look at someone you love, someone you know, and say, I really need to be taken care of. I need to just receive the hell out of some love. I need that, right? It's so vulnerable. And honestly, what we're doing when our subconscious is like doubling down and doubling down on ways to get the care, it thinks it's peaking this emotional experience. It thinks it's getting the peak, highest, most intense sensation it can get, because it's pretty high sensation to text someone and be like, I need to come live on your couch. Like, I don't have anywhere else to go. And it's just as high, if not higher, of a sensation to not string yourself up like that, and instead look at someone you love, be vulnerable, have some courage, and say, I need to be loved. I need to be loved, or I'm going to set my life on fire, right? Like, being able to know, like, hey, I'm getting close. I'm about to touch that hot stove. I'm about to do it. I'm about to do it. And I don't need you to rescue me, but I need you to love me, because I can't do it for me right now. Humbling yourself. There's having the courage to ask for what you want instead of acting out the subconscious, just painful ways that we learn to get it. And that's all it is. It's just like we were talking at the beginning, that pattern. We learn that I can get my need met for care. Like, if I'm a projector, you're a projector in human design, waiting for the invitation. I love to be invited to things. Well, the intersection of that is my
is it's a bitch is what it is.
really wanting to know that I'm invited. So how do I really want to know? How do I how was I subconsciously figuring out a way to really know that someone wanted me there? I was late all the time. All the time. Well, do you know what happens when you're late and then you show up somewhere? People are like, oh, thank God you're here. We've been waiting for you. And I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing so much shame for being late. No, I'm not. I'm like, thank God, I know that you want me here.
Yeah.
There's no conscious or known self. There's no conscious knowing of doing this. It is on autopilot until you start engaging in this process. And it's like, I always tell clients, like, I tell you things that you're not going to be able to unknow.
Yep.
I have figured out how to use that as a force of good rather than just like slicing people in half and then sending them on their way like I used to. And that's another part. This is,
I was going to say, what kink is that?
You repurpose. This is how I explain it. You learn to repurpose the things you were doing to get what it is you actually want. So what it is I actually wanted when I was, just verbally taking people down a few notches was, I want to be remembered. Well, when you're working with me and you are talking about some of the things and you understand your patterns in a new way, you can't unknow what we're talking about. You are going to be different. I don't know how it works when you have done like one-on-one work, like with your clients, but the most successful people that I've worked with are like, oh, it's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
It was that simple all along. And it's not some like internal berating yourself. It's like, damn, my whole life just changed. My whole
Yep.
life just changed with this perspective. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, yeah, I think that's where the end of that thought is.
Yep.
Was
You're like, we're tying
right
out
there.
up. No, I love that. And that's another thing. And like, this is not just an episode for me to like shit on the spiritual community, but I think there's a lot of theatrics, like we were talking about, like people expect there to be, and sometimes there are, don't get me wrong, but like this giant download, like, oh my God, the sky just cracked open and I just got all of this completely novel wisdom that I never received before. Most of life is not that way. It's the teeniest, tiniest little thing. Like in the fitness, nutrition, coaching space, it's okay, well, what if you just ordered your groceries instead of having to go to the store if you're short on time? Oh my God, life shit, like simple shit. People don't, well, also, we have a commitment to things not being simple. We think the more complex they are, because we feel that we are complex, which we are, but like the more complex things are, the more complex the path that we take is, the more that we've earned the outcome for some ass backwards reason. Like, oh, the more that I have to, like, the more mad scientisting I have to do with my own self, that,
Mhm.
oh, obviously, because I also think too, people use that on the other side as an excuse, love you guys, but an excuse for why you never become the person you want to be, because you're like, oh well, the process was just too complicated and I couldn't figure it out. Like, whoever could have figured that out?
Yep. Except there are people figuring it out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are people figuring it out all the time. There is, I will tell anyone who wants to listen to me to listen to Alan Watts. You can
Mm-hmm.
find talks on YouTube, on Spotify. There was one I was listening to a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about when people settle in for their like spiritual experiences, they go to some spiritual teachers who are very harsh, who
Mm-hmm.
are very commanding, who want to give them the most rigorous, most stressful experiences, and they think, oh hell yes, this person's about to like really get into me. They're about to just, rip me apart. Thank God. I'm finally making progress.
Mm-hmm.
What?
That
And
sounds like
he
a
goes
sub
on,
thing to me. That sounds like some sub desires to me.
okay, but like really though, right? And like, let's talk societally. We are in a society that values control. So when we can be broken down into our nothingness, we think that we're doing something,
Yep.
right? We think that we're doing something, but the commitment to suffering, like you said, like the commitment to suffering, the commitment to struggle in our spirituality, the commitment to over complicating things simply because we think that we are complicated. I dated this guy in college, and if he happens to be listening to this, that would be pretty wild. So I'm gonna put your shit on blast a little bit here, but he would just thought he was the most complicated man alive. Like his pain was so unique to him, and he did experience like some really significant trauma, and that's not to say that that doesn't make it complex. He just thought he was so complicated though, and like as someone that learned to see people's patterns very early on and just like see through it, I was just like, that's such a weird story to tell yourself to like make up for all of this other toxic behavior, right? We don't like to consider ourselves toxic in our own lives, but one of the key things that I like understandings that I came into was I think I am oppressing myself. I
Mm-hmm.
am responsible for some of this suffering, right? If that doesn't sensationalize the hell out of your ego, like I don't know what will. And, he and, we mirror each other, right? We mirror everyone we're with. And I thought that I was just like this complex little piece of wound up trauma that was never going to be like, as a knot, an infinite knot that's never going to come undone. But we're not that complicated. We just like things to be challenging, like you said, to feel like we've earned it, to feel like it was worth it, to feel like, oh, hell yeah, I finally solved the problem.
Oh yeah. And we don't want to accept ease when it presents itself, especially anybody with like a trauma background. We're like, no, I need the chaos baseline. I need that. That's my home base. And so when that's not present, it's like, oh, fuck no. Like, not doing that, not playing that. There's no way that that could be true, right?
There's no way it could be that easy. Look how hard it was to get here. Look how much I struggled to get here. It could not possibly be that easy. Let me keep trying the hard way, right? Like, keep doing it the hard way. And like you said, like the book Existential Kink really touches on like the BDSM concepts of like sadomasochism and like the ways that we choose to like experience pain or choose not to experience pain, just completely like, you know, avert away from it. But most of the things that we do are rooted in the subconscious quest for pain, because we think it's a solution to our problem. And again, most of the time the issue is you just don't know what the actual problem is. You just know the symptom. You just have the arm that's gushing blood and you're like, this is my problem. And it's like, oh, I think it's the problem is actually you didn't know how to use the like power tool you were using. So maybe we could figure out how to use that, and then you won't like nearly chop off your arm, right? We one of the like big things that I find to be super helpful is like, what were you doing right before this like bad thing happened? Talk to me about like the 5 days that preceded this super patternistic behavior. And you start like running back the tape, right? You're like watching the gameplay and you're like, you got me.
You're like, ah,
you got me. I was absolutely constructing this situation because I was about to get my need met.
It was good for the plot.
It was good for the plot. Like character development. It was good character development.
Yep. But you can't stay in the hard part of the plot forever. There has to be any good story. There has to, like the main character. At least in the types of books and movies I like, I don't like when the main character ends on a bad note.
Dude, okay. Have you seen The Breakup? Vince Vaughn, Jennifer Aniston.
No, I have not.
That movie ruined me. It was the first movie that I saw that did not have a happy ending. This is probably going to sound like ridiculous to people listening to this. I don't care. I was at the movie theater with my grandma. And like the credits start rolling. And I'm just like, that can't be the end of the movie. Like, spoiler if you haven't seen it. Sorry. They don't get back together. And I'm like, what the hell is this?
You're like, who wrote this?
Exactly. What happened to you? That this is like the story that you're telling. And then I'm like, oh, life. Like, that's real life, right? But not having like what is it? The climax, the rising action, falling, and then a resolution. Like, I'm like, I need some resolve. I need that note to play at the end of the song that like resolves the whole song and like brings everything back together. I need that like moment to come back together, you know? And so many people are committed to, and I was one of them. And like, even doing this work, you know, because we have many personal conversations about this, I'm like, damn, a bitch is really committed to her suffering. Wow.
Same here. Yep.
You know, like the whole purpose of this is being able to recognize it. Yes. Like, you may not recognize it while you're in it because you're just like nose is pressed right up to the tree that you're like staring at instead of being able to see it all. But like the moment you finally take a few steps back and you're like, oh shit, I've been in this forest before. This is the man, I'm so clever. Right? That's one of my favorite, now as someone with a praise kink, I love being like, damn girl, you are so smart. That was such a clever way that you figured out to get this need met. Interesting. Interesting. Then I play, and then I move along, right? And that's not like, I think a lot of people have this conception that perfection is what's going to arise out of these spiritual practices, the health practices. I'm sure that you experience that perfection is what's going to come, and it's not. It is simply being able to live your life with a new understanding. I loved your last email, like breaking down embodiment, because
thank you.
That is the last component of that. That's where it's like, oh shit, it's about to get easy because it's about to become my baseline. What if I go all the way back to square one and just blow it all up? And then walk through your little plot developing story once again, right? And like, but once you finally cross over that threshold to, I'm allowed to be and act and react and grow through that, right? That's not to say that it comes without consequence, right? If my reactions are harming myself or hurting other people or, you know, whatever, that doesn't mean I just give myself a pass and be like, damn, that's your kinks. Congrats for like noticing it, right? So many of the ways that I see this spoken about, it's like, oh yeah, like my kink is just like, I love sneaking around. I'm like, first of all, that's not your kink. That's like the symptom of the kink, right? And the second thing, why are you using this to stop? Like, that's my stopping action. I'm allowed to stop there. I'm allowed to stop and excuse myself for doing the things I'm doing because I've armed myself with this knowledge. And so that's another component of it is when I'm working with someone, I'm like, I have to be very aware if they're just using this to strengthen the pattern or if they're using it to see through the illusion of the pattern, right? And that's part of how I blend the spiritual world, the energetic world, the metaphysical, esoteric, whatever word you want to use, that I came to this through. I'm going to be able to read your energy. I'm going to be able to read the things that you're saying and key into the pattern and be like, I see you using this as your good, like, reason why, you know, and that circles back to for me, anxiety. I just had to stop there. That's all I had to do. I got the name, I got to stop at it instead of ever learning how to be with it, how to move through it, what it might be communicate. I never actually felt the anxiety in my body. I was just braced against it the whole time. And it's like learning how to be receptive instead of stopping at the human experiences. My anxiety is not going to magically vanish, you know? It does change and shift and become easier to be with over time, but it will never be easy to be with if the only thing you're doing is bracing against your own humanity or using the things that you discover as a way to excuse the things that you do. There's a difference in approval and excusing, right?
Ooh,
so
that's such a good phrase.
Yeah, I can approve when I'm in, oh man, when I'm in my patterns, when I am in my pattern and I'm like, wait, zoom out. And it's almost like I imagine like a chessboard and I'm like above it and I'm like, damn, I see what I'm doing here. That was very clever. I can go, and this is my kink, so I'm just going to keep doing it. Or I can go, damn girl, you were so clever. Let's play. Let's am it up. Let's act it up. Live a fantasy. That's the tie-in. There we go. I get to play. I get to dress up as the most over-the-top version of whatever this pattern is that I'm playing in. I have to tell, I live with my husband, so he has to know if I'm doing it. But beyond that, all I have to do is play. That's what this work comes back to. That's why it's inner child healing. We do not.
I was literally about to say. I was like, oh, kids love to play. And it's literally like when you're playing make-believe and you're like, oh, this is what's happening in this story. Like, let me further this. So like, It's so funny too, because the way that you frame this, it is so spiritual, because when you're in that place of, oh, you clever thing, that's like taking the role of the observer in meditation. It's
Mhm.
like active living, but like way more fun meditation.
Yes, it is. Okay, let's get into this. People
Love
think that
it.
meditation has to be just like, I'm going to sit here and my eyes are closed and I'm breathing and I'm not attached to any of my thoughts because attachment is obviously bad. I've heard that a lot. And you're just like
Mhm.
really trying to get into your space. Meditation is that, but that's not the only thing that meditation is. Um, Ram Dass is another person that I will tell anyone to listen to. And he talks about the yoga of life. So yoga is not just
Mm.
movement. Yoga is there I think are 8 branches or on the tree of yoga that are like it's ways to live your life
Mhm.
and making your life the being in your body, in your mundane ass, just boring life, and bringing your attention and awareness to being in
Mhm.
that moment. That's meditation. That's
Mhm.
allowing your observer self to come in and say, what's going on in here? Oh, I love being in here. It's so nice to observe, to see, to experience myself, right? There's a Ram Dass like talk that he gave, and one of the examples that he talked about was like filling up your water.
Mm.
My ass is standing there going, "Oh, this is taking such a long time." I have big water bottles, okay? It takes a long time to fill up a half-gallon water bottle,
It sure does.
okay? So I'm just sitting there going, "Oh God, I hate this." And he's like, "This is the miracle. Like, this is a miracle. You have water being just like pumped into your, and it's like the sense of awe and wonder and curiosity that children have. It is bringing
Mm.
that into your everyday." Um, from an inner child perspective, from a childhood development perspective, kids go through stages of play. So it's developmentally inappropriate to have, let's say, like a 2-year-old sharing toys, because at that age kids should be tandem playing. So if you can identify what stage of play that you're in, and you know,
Mm.
I really need someone to be playing alongside me, or I really need to be playing with someone and like bouncing this play off of one another. If you can observe yourself to know where you're at in your play needs, you will be able to work out the weird experience of life through play, through pleasure, right? The um kids in dress up, right? The Live a Fantasy card
Mhm.
had like a wig and it had like the
Mhm. Yeah,
like
the
fairy
mirror,
light.
with the
Yeah.
big Broadway lights, yeah.
So kids in dress up centers, you'll see them like they're playing with their baby doll and they're like, the kid is the dentist, the baby is them. That's what they're doing, is acting out that weird dentist experience where they laid there, with a light
Mm.
shining down on their face, and someone had crap in their mouth, and like they're trying to figure out
Mhm.
what's going on. It's a weird, confusing experience.
Mhm.
Being a human is a weird, confusing experience, right?
Facts.
And we have so many backlogged weird experiences that we put on autopilot and say, this runs my life, this is the rule that runs my life.
Mm.
And this
Mhm.
is the play of bringing your attention to when you're in it and then being like, what if I intentionally acted this out instead of just being on autopilot?
Mhm.
What if I played, right? We came home from seeing Doctor Strange
Mhm.
once. Now, we have a pre-movie ritual. I'm going to smoke. The joint is just enough where you're riding in the car on the way. It's the perfect size, right? So we go see Doctor Strange. It was really good. And I really enjoyed myself on the way to the movie. And I really enjoyed myself at the movie. And my house looked the same as it did when I left. I came home, my house looked the same. And yet, mysteriously, I am furious at the state of my home. And I was like, this is so irritating. There's stuff everywhere. this clutter was here before, but I'm mad about it now. So I'm huffing and puffing and I'm stomping around my house carrying stuff. And I get to my bathroom with an armload of stuff and I catch my reflection and I'm like, what are you doing? Full curiosity, no judgment, no shame for me basically acting like a tyrant, right? And immediately my like ego self was like, oh, hey, yeah, we've got a rule. You want to know about it? Okay, here's the rule. The rule is I've got to suffer when I enjoy things. And we're in a little bit of suffer debt because we didn't suffer before this movie. So now we've got to suffer afterward. And I was like, damn, that's so smart. Okay, how do I play? How do I play in this? Well, here's what you need to do. We're going to give an Academy Award-winning performance for the most angry person that's ever cleaned their home. Okay. I'm like, and I walk out of the bedroom after like having this little conversation with myself, and I am telling my husband, I'm like, listen, I just identified an ego rule. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stomp. I'm going to just like, I'm like gritted teeth and clenching my jaw and breathing heavy. And I'm playing. I need you to know that I know how silly this is. It's ridiculous that I'm doing it. Okay. And he's like, okay, should I also do things like, should I be mad too? And I'm like, you don't have to be mad. Okay. So I huffed and puffed and blew the freaking house down and lost some of my interest in suffering in order to enjoy myself by playing. And wouldn't you know, my house got clean.
Like we said at the beginning, like, even if you don't get the big thing you're thinking, at least you got off a few times. At least you had a clean house.
Yeah. I got the clean house, and I've got a Virgo Venus. A clean house is very erotic to me. I love a clean house, right? Like I love the vibes. So yeah,
that's fucking amazing.
The exchange is usually looking a little silly. And if you're willing to look a little silly, to sound a little silly, to humble yourself to someone else, if you happen to be doing this weird adult kink play with other people around, to humble yourself to other people and say, yeah, you know, all those times that like right before we left to go like see my parents, I was like, you know, in a mad dash throughout the house and I'm just like so grumpy. It turns out this is what I was doing. And most of the time, the other person who's been observing you for a long time is like, yeah.
You're like, no.
So glad you figured it out because I want, you know, and that's my perspective on doing this alone, doing it together. Like, you can do this by yourself. You can walk around your own house by yourself doing these same things and not have to tell anyone you're freaking doing your healing work. That's the other part. You don't have to tell anyone you're doing your healing work. You can just do it. And it can be fun just for you. It can be fun and an experience just for you.
Absolutely. And then the exhibitionists like us, they just need somebody.
Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, now let me take a picture of that clean house. Here's my hey, I just cleaned my house. Here's my clean house. I'm so turned up by how clean my house is. Oh
my god. My favorite is when I like post some bullshit on my close friend story and then I post like a completely normal story to everyone else afterwards and I'm like, I know y'all have the context for where this came from. But no, it's like
you watch it with continuity in mind. I watch my story a lot. Do you watch your story with not close friend continuity in mind? I'm like, what is the average viewer seeing?
Right. My latest conundrum, because I've been on close friends a lot lately, my latest conundrum is I'll be like, oh, I'll see all the dots at the top of the screen. I'll be like, oh, wow, I was really active on social media today. And then I like go back through and I look at it and I'm like, I was shit posting on my close friends all day today. The whole community got minimal value out of this day, but the close friends went on a journey with me.
Yeah, sometimes a got a meme exploration of my and half of my birth chart and
Yep.
at least 2 sad or horny songs that I was listening to today. Sometimes
both. But truly, I was thinking this when you were saying, like, it's gonna look silly sometimes, like,
Yes.
kind of tying that in, like, what bigger safety is there than to be able to be silly with someone? Because silliness is such a childlike state. Silliness is
Yes.
silliness is so vulnerable because you're not on guard at all. When somebody's being silly, they are literally playing. So even just from like a nervous system, fight or flight, rest and digest perspective, being silly is probably one of the most parasympathetic things you can do. And so if you can be silly with somebody,
Mhm.
that's fucking precious.
As someone who also loves a little jokey joke to like break the tension, that silliness is vital, right?
Yes.
It is vital to not listen. You also take yourself seriously and you also like a good jokey joke. And you've got to have both. That's the paradox,
I was
right?
say that's the paradox.
That's the paradox. You've got to have both. You know, and the paradox for like context is any two things that exist within you that seem to be in opposition of one another. So when we're engaged in like the paradox process, which is how I like navigate my paradox coaching, when we're engaged in our paradox process, we're usually looking at two things, the ego and the subconscious, that seem to contradict one another. But it's like pleasure and shame, or fear and desire. Most of the time, in order to get into an approval state of whichever one it is that you're disapproving of, right? Most of the time, we approve of our fear. We approve of our pain. We approve of our suffering. And we don't approve of our enjoyment, or we don't approve of the fact that we could possibly be getting some enjoyment out of our suffering or our pain or whatever. And that approval state, I've talked about this like on a couple of posts, but you can get into your approval state really in 3 ways. You can cry about it. Feels good to cry. I don't know about you, but like after a good cry, I'm like, I feel like a toddler.
Dude,
I'm
good
like,
cry is a good poop for the soul. It just cleans you right out. Like it's the move.
It really like that 100%. It feels good. You feel a solid kind of empty. Or you can laugh. You can play, right? We've all seen Monsters Inc. We've all seen Monsters Inc. The fear was not filling it up quite as well. The play, the laughter, the joy, the silliness, that is what gets you into a safe state. You can't be in your pleasure and be safe, or be unsafe at the same time. You cannot be in your pleasure and be unsafe.
And the opposite's true. If you're in a fear state, you're in an activated state. And so the decision, it's like the thing that I wrote that I sent you the other day, like when you're making decisions out of fear, you're super guarded, tight, tense, like all these things. So you're not necessarily in a place to do productive, if we want to say productive or objective or just like the meaningful work, because the place that you're operating from is like this scared little animal, just like that. I got to do whatever I need to do to not die versus thrive.
Yeah, the being able to, you know, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people that are listening that can sympathize with the experience of like really wanting to have sex with someone and your body's just so like braced against it. Like you're just like, my brain wants this, but my body's saying no. I don't know why, you know. And Alan Watts says you can't muscle your way into pleasure, right? No matter how like high you turn the setting up, you're not going to be able to get there if your body's like not wanting to be there. So laughter, being able to laugh and joke and play, that will get you out of that tense, braced state so that you can get into pleasure-based approval, so that you can get into, you know, and when I say approval, like approving of your patterns, it's really one, being able to laugh at yourself and say, I see what I'm doing. I'm willing to stop taking myself so seriously, to stop taking this pain and suffering, again, air quotes, because like when you know it is pain and suffering, but I also know what I'm doing, it's hard to take it so seriously and so personally anymore. It's just like, damn, I'm pretty clever, right? And once you can get past that first layer of seriousness, and really what I like teach people how to do is to stop bracing against how pleasurable it actually is. Once you acknowledge and tune into the subtle symptoms or signs in your body of like, damn, this actually is something that I was subconsciously getting pleasure from, subconsciously getting the desire need met from. I teach people how to stop bracing against it so you can get the pleasure, right, from life that you've been attempting to get without realizing it. And you can't be scared. You can't be in that guarded like state. The play is the access, because the last one's an orgasm. That's the third way you can get into approval, right? You can incrementally build up. If you've been in the crying phase for a long time, we can try laughing about it. We can try bringing some levity to it. And ultimately, like where you're going to go is being able to bring an orgasmic level of approval to these things. Because if you're willing to orgasm about it, your body feels safe with.
Yes. I actually want to, as we wind down, I want to wind down on a taboo because nobody wants to talk about orgasms. We do. We love talking about it.
I do.
Right. You're like, I don't know who you're talking about or two, but they don't sound very fun, which I would agree. But there is such like a, especially for women, like a taboo around orgasm and around pleasure and that like ecstasy point. So as we wrap up this show, like, why is it so powerful to get into that state of approval through orgasm specifically? And like, what can this look like in practical application? There's no filter needed. Podcasts don't give a fuck. Like, how do people actually, because it's one thing to hear like, oh yeah, I just need to like orgasm about it. Like, great. But like, what does that actually look like in practice?
So it kind of depends on how in touch you are with your turn on symptoms. So that's one of the first things, like when you jump into paradox play, you've got like paradox basics. And I'm like, here's the intro to the intro. And in this, you're going to get clear about what your turn on symptoms are. So when you know what your turn on symptoms are, and like we all have overt ones, you're like, yeah, I'm wet. I feel great. Like I can tell that I'm like really turned on. Those are your really overt sexual turn on symptoms, but you also have subtle turn on. You have non-sexual turn on. So if you think about the physical sensations that happen in your body when, let's say, like you're eating a really beautiful meal with friends, or you're sitting outside listening to live music, or whatever it is that like really does it for you, the thing that you're like really into, when you've like really successfully hit a PR, like you feel, your brain is like, oh yeah, I feel happy, I feel elated, I feel no. I'm not interested in your emotion words. Let's take it even to a more base place. What are the physical sensations you're experiencing in your body? Okay, well, my physical sensations are my legs are hot. I've got really like calm breathing. Maybe when I'm listening to live music, my breath does start to get a little faster. I'm getting like really worked up, you know, I can feel it in my shoulders. My shoulders are, whatever your physical sensations are, right? Because if you can identify your overt and your subtle turn on symptoms, and you can, in your pain patterns and your just the pattern of like, damn, why does this always keep happening? Wait, I'm going to stop. I'm going to check in with my body. What are the physical sensations I'm experiencing right now? That will sensationalize the fuck out of you. If you're willing to stop and go, what are the physical sensations I'm experiencing? And I'm not going to call them anger. I'm not going to call it my anxiety, or I'm not going to call it this. What are the physical sensations I'm experiencing? And you're like, well, my thighs are hot. My shoulders are tingling. My hands feel warm. And I'm like, sounds exactly like how you described your turn on that you're interested in. And that's where the key starts shifting, is when you can start to recognize your physical sensations when you're experiencing your pattern. Because if you can experience and agree, oh, I am turned on by this, it's a lot easier to get into that orgasmic level approval of it. So once you know, like, let's say you regularly are, what was one of the examples that we used earlier? Someone that's like on someone else's couch. You think about sending that text to your friend, and you're just like thinking about it, and you're just like, oh God, I'm getting so worked up. My hands are like shaking, my shoulders feel tingly, my legs feel warm. And I'm like just mentally planning this text. Hey, Emily, I need to come like live on your couch. I have nowhere to go. I have no one to talk to. I have, you know, I need help. And I'm like, oh, those sensations that I'm feeling in my body are the same sensations I feel maybe when I'm overtly sexually turned on. Right. That's, for me, that was the most sensational part, was like, I'm ignoring turn on a lot. Right. Like, I am more keyed into just the undercurrent of pleasure that I'm open to in my life now. And the pleasure of just being in life, because I'm aware of like how my body reacts when I am turned on, when my body is saying yes. Your body can give a yes, while your brain, your ego, who you know yourself to be, is saying no. Right. Just the same as your brain can say yes and your body's going no. Right. So once you begin to recognize, like, I'm experiencing the either subtle or overt physical sensations of turn on. I've been kind of turned on all day. It was a pretty high stress day. Maybe I want to go home and think about this a little more, right? I'm not suggesting you just like stop and pleasure yourself in the middle of the fucking grocery store when you're having a particularly stressful situation. Like, you know, it's not like that. I mean, if you're into, you know, a little voyeurism,
I was going to say, we're going to find a way.
Maybe you need to find safe ways to do that to not get in trouble. I am not encouraging.
This is not medical advice.
Yeah, I'm not encouraging public indecency. I'm not encouraging breaking the law. However, I am saying that if you are willing to acknowledge, whoa, I've been keyed up all day, and not in the angry, stressed out way I usually view this, I can see that what my body is really craving is to give a yes. My body wants to say yes. And the only thing that's stopping me is my mind being so committed to calling this suffering that I'm unwilling to see it as pleasure. And again, that will sensationalize the fuck out of you. The first time you're like, okay, what if I'm going to touch myself about this? Okay. And like, you can get into a meditative state with it. In Existential Kink, she has a whole meditative container that she encourages setting up for this. And being able to say things like, I'm willing to allow myself to take deep pleasure in the ways that I have learned to get this need for care met by needing to live on my friend's couch, by sabotaging this job, by ruining my relationship, whatever it is that you're just like patternistically doing. I'm willing to admit that I take deep pleasure in that. And I'm willing to allow myself to receive this pleasure. Even saying that, your body is like, oh God, okay, like we're really like, we're keying up the sensation. Why does that key up the sensation? It's because it's freaking taboo to be like, I want to be taken care of so badly that I'm willing to ruin my life in order to be taken care of. When you can be honest with yourself about that, you can start to be honest with yourself and everyone else about a lot of things. And you start to genuinely change your life when you start to tell yourself the truth. Radical honesty is hands down the most erotic thing you can do. And telling yourself the truth, you know, Libra is all about wielding the sword of communication and truth and justice. When you're willing to tell yourself the truth about the ways that you have been acting out this desire you never knew you had, now you know you have it. and you're seeing all of the ways that you get that desire need met, when you're willing to tell yourself the truth about that, your body's like, give it to me now, right? Like, it's like the whole day where you've experienced this patternistic stress of, whatever it is for you, you can look at that as, oh man, I was kind of like edging all day.
Yeah.
Damn. Right. And like, you realize how turned on you already are, how excited you actually are to finally give approval, because that's the only reason the desire exists. Because if you go all the way back to that kid that was told, no, you need to be a big kid. I shouldn't have to do this for you. You should be able to do these things for yourself. And you go all the way back to them. They're getting relief. They are getting so much relief. And, we like to think of the inner child as some like weird concept that we're disconnected from, but we're not. It's us. We are sexual creatures from the moment that we are born. And we are taking in conditioning from the moment that we are born. Conditioning that says you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. And when we can give that approval to all of those backlogged desire requests for care, when you can say, it's okay to want to be tucked into bed. It's okay to like want that little kiss on your nose before you go to sleep. It's okay to want those things. And it's also okay that you have been acting out and all of these other ways to get that. And I am no longer willing to shame myself for what I do to get my needs met. And I'm no longer willing to participate in my own suffering by continuing to do it. And I'm going to have a few orgasms in order to like allow myself to just, because again, you will not have an orgasm if your body does not approve of the things you're experiencing. And like in her book, she gives a really beautiful container that I do not personally find to be one that I go to, because I don't need a big buildup to it. Some people won't need a big meditative container buildup. I'm like, hell yeah, I've been ready to go. Like, I can't believe I've waited this long to realize I was getting this pleasure and like get into it. Some people want nice and slow and lots of romancing. For me, I can realize I romanced myself all day long before I got here. I could see what I was doing, and being able to identify how you show up sexually. Some people are like, I need all day buildup. I need all day anticipation. If you are that type of person, it's likely that you're playing out your patterns all day in order to get what you want, right? You've probably suffered all day to get to the end of the day for that little bit of enjoyment, right?
Now you need to start doing, you probably already do, an analysis of your clients' Venus and Mars placements and how they play out their pattern.
Behind you, if I flip this camera around, there is a whole bunch of post-it notes on the window with all of my theories, because really what this comes down to is being a mad scientist that can connect the patterns, that can anticipate how these things inform one another. That is what I'm interested in. How does your birth chart or your human design inform the way that this is showing up in your everyday life? How does the free will of the people around you that you interacted with and your chart and your free will interact to this beautiful little blossom of struggle and suffering that we're looking at right here? And how can we unwind the pattern?
I fucking love it. I fucking love it. I could go on for literally the entire day about this, but we'll start wrapping this up. So with the relaunch of the podcast, one of my biggest focus points, and it's always been this way, but just like really making it an announced focus, is ensuring that people have something that they can take away and start doing from whatever conversation that we have. So if you were to give someone one piece of practical advice of how they can start playing with this work outside of working with you, which we'll get to in a second, what would that be?
Start asking yourself the question, is it possible that I am turned on by this? That will change your life.
I love it. I love it. And be willing to be super fucking honest. Don't just be like, no.
Because is it possible? All you have to do, your brain's so smart. It is so smart. It's a nice little computer that's just built in. If you ask yourself a question, your brain will find the answer. Is it possible I'm turned on by this? You can say no all you want, but your body will tell you otherwise. And asking yourself that question, and like you said, being able to be very honest with yourself, and then asking yourself, if I am turned on by this, what could I possibly be getting that I didn't even realize I was getting from this? Those are the two questions. Is it possible that you're turned on by this? And if you are turned on by this, what do you think you're getting from it? If you can figure out the yes, because it's a yes, I'm sorry, spoilers, it's a yes. You are turned on by it. And if you can identify what you're getting from it, you are already like 6 steps ahead of where you were. You are already changing your life. Because if you can understand that you're turned on by it, you can begin to understand that you do not have to be ashamed of it. You do not have to repress it. You do not have to suffer for it anymore. Those 2 questions will change the way you think about your suffering.
I love it. Amazing. Amazing. Now, next, obligatory. If people want to find you, they want to consume your content, if they want to work with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram first, lionhive_, but lionhivecoaching.com. That's where you can book to interview with me, to work with me one-to-one. lionhivecoaching.com/paradoxplay. You can jump into the paradox and guide yourself. I'm guiding you. I'm right there with you. We meet once a week on Discord, but you're taking your own pace. Everyone has their own sexual pace. Everyone has their own play pace. Everyone has their own healing pace. So you can binge the content and be like, hey, I'm healed, like, thank you. Or you can